Good day to you all. Today let's talk about hairsprings. Specifically, let's talk about straightening bent hairsprings. But before I get into it, I'd like to speak to you and show you a few tools that I find both necessary and helpful for the process. The first and most obvious is going to be the tweezers. I personally prefer to use the number 7s, while some people like the number 5s or a sharp pair of number 3Cs. I like the number 7s better because when it comes to holding the tips of the tweezers perpendicular to the hairspring as you're bending it, number 5s or number 3Cs often get in the way of your line of sight. If you're over the hairspring, directly over it, and you're looking down into it, they can kind of get in the way. Where the number 7s, as you hold them, both your hands can be relaxed on the side, as well as they do not block your line of sight. This is true also for if you should do your hairspring work underneath a microscope. The straight number 5s or 3Cs kind of get in the way of the lens of the microscope or interfere, whereas the number 7s leave plenty of room and do not, again, get in the way of the line of the sight or the lens of the microscope. I alter the tips of my tweezers so they can be somewhat flat or thin and at the same time wide. This by comparison to, let's say, a brand new pair of number 5s, which are very narrow and needle-like. Being wide allows a more firm grasp on a hairspring, and this is important especially in dealing with some of the stronger and more robust pocket watch size hairsprings. Now here's a set of hairspring picks that I absolutely would not be without. They're little picks that have the tips of them shaped in different ways that are specific for different uses. Some are for hairspring collets, some are for more sized for wristwatch size hairsprings, others are sized more for pocket watch work. Regardless, it's a very valuable set, and if I found myself without this set, I would actually make a new set because they're very, very useful, and I use them often. They're not easy to find. I don't find them like, let's say, on eBay or other places, but they would be very easy to make. I find it helpful to do hairspring work on a piece of glass. It seems to me that using the picks and the tweezers, they just slide around and things operate more smoothly on a piece of glass or something that has a glass-like surface to it. So if you don't have a piece of white opaque glass, you can do as I do here and just lay down a piece of white paper and put a piece of pane glass on top of it. There are a couple things that appear to be bent hairsprings, but actually are not bent hairsprings. And one of those things is a hairspring that is just tangled. And here's a good example of one. This is just as it came out of the parts drawer, and it looks bent. It looks like there's some issues there, and really the only thing is that the hairspring stud was caught between a couple coils, and it's fixed. The next one, again, it looks, if you look at it closely, it looks like there's a slight bend between a couple of coils, and the reality is that it is the very tip of the hairspring is caught between a couple of those coils, and once it's loosed, then it looks in the round as it should. And this one, again, it looks all bent up, but it is legitimately tangled, more tangled than the previous two. Now, to untangle a hairspring like this, what I do is I place it upside down on a balance tack and pull down from the hairspring stud. And this shows the tangle pretty easily. And then with a curved pair of hairspring picks or a couple of the number 7s, you can slowly but surely work the tangle towards the end of the hairspring, towards the hairspring stud. And once you get there, it's just a matter of grasping the hairspring stud and weaving it in and out of the hairspring until it is completely untangled. This demonstration here is a simple 1/over tangle. There are many examples of much more involved where you really have to weave it in and out to free it up quite a bit. But once you do, you will note by flexing the hairspring downward that there won't be any disruptions in the spiral, conical spiral of the hairspring. Incidentally, flexing it like this does not damage or hurt the hairspring. So the last of the 4 hairsprings which I've selected, when put through this simple check, shows the really nice conical spiral with no tangles, and that tells us that it is legitimately bent and needs to be straightened. Another thing that will make a hairspring appear to be bent when it is not is very simply if the hairspring is dirty or if there is oil on the hairspring that causes the coils of the hairspring to stick to each other. And this happens even after the watch has been cleaned. Perhaps you have old cleaning solution or old rinse solution, and it doesn't thoroughly clean the hairspring. And if the coils stick to each other just like it is there, it makes it look like it's all bent up. And the solution is very simple. Just use 1-dip or a similar hairspring cleaning solution and give it a cleaning with that, and it'll free up. Now, there are 2 primary ways in which a hairspring will be bent out of shape, and the first one that I'm going to show you is when a hairspring is bent out of round, and that is when the spacing of the coils are not even in relationship to one another when you look straight down at the hairspring. And the way you correct this and know where to grab with the tweezers and where to bend is that you start in the center at the collet and follow the coil outward while at the same time observing the spacing of the coils looking towards the center, towards the collet. So when you come to a space where the spacing is different, sometimes it's going to be wider if it was bent out, sometimes it'll be narrower when it was bent inward. What you do is you find the place where it is the most different. In this case, in this example, the spacing is wider. So we find the widest point in that spacing, which is about right there, and we go backwards towards the center, follow the coil backwards 90 degrees, which is about right there. And this is where you grasp it with the tweezers and bend, since it was bent out, so we're going to bend it towards the center and reduce that spacing to the amount that it should be. Now, I believe it's the Watch Repair channel here on YouTube, in his video on straightening hairsprings, he says that you simply look for that point in which the hairspring starts to deviate from the correct spacing, and it's at that point you grasp and bend. And I don't want to in any way discount the value of his video, but you will find that that point where the spacing starts to deviate is approximately or about 90 degrees from either the widest or narrowest point in the spacing. So his method is accurate. I just wanted to add this one more additional consideration in finding the place that you need to bend at. So at this point, we continue to follow the coil outward while looking inward at the spacing, and we eventually come across a point where the spacing is actually narrower in its relationship to the next coil of hairspring, and we go back 90 degrees, and there again we find the point in which we grasp and bend to correct the spacing. The second way hairspring can be bent is out of flat, as you see in this example here. And this is most easily observed by looking across at an angle at the hairspring as opposed to straight down from up above. And to figure out where to grasp and bend this to straighten it, we're going to follow the same technique as we did for the out of round, and we're going to start in the center at the collet, and we're going to follow the coils outward. When we reach the point where we observe the greatest difference between a given coil and the coil inside of it, at this point, instead of going back 90 degrees, we go back 180 degrees. And there is the point that we want to grasp with the tweezers and bend. Let's go back to that earlier hairspring from when I was untangling hairsprings. And this one was legitimately bent. Let's see if we can straighten it out. It appears to be both out of round and out of flat. And the overcoil is going to add a certain level of complexity to it simply because it appears to be in the way at times. We'll have to work around it. The method that I follow in straightening hairsprings that have multiple bends to them, both out of round and out of flat, is I first peer down from the top and try to put it in round as best as I possibly can. At the very least, taking out the worst of the bends and putting it in a state where it will not be, the coils of the hairspring will not be touching each other. On this particular hairspring, once I took out the first and the worst bend of it, I noticed there are several other slight bends to it that needed to be addressed. And so I address it in a couple different places. I should have stopped at that point and taken a picture and made arrows like I did previously, but I didn't do that. I was in the zone and I just wanted to get it done. But you'll see that I bend from several different places to get it in round as we want it. You'll note by the end, when I have the hairspring in round, that it appears that it is no longer out of flat as I originally thought it was. And so evidently what made it appear like it was out of flat was that one coil was so far out of round that it rode up on top of or underneath of another coil, making it look out of flat. That all being said, if you look very closely at the finished product, there is a very thin line that shows that the hairspring is slightly out of flat. Because it is so slight, I think I'm going to leave it as is and consider it good. Since that one was a little bit easier than what I expected, let's try another one. Now this one, admittedly, is not a hairspring for beginners, but I decided to include this in this video simply to demonstrate that the methods and the techniques that I use are the very same methods that I've already demonstrated. As I explained before, I start by putting the hairspring reasonably well in the round. And when I say reasonably well, I mean in comparison to the way it is originally. And getting the coils to the point where if they're not evenly spaced, at least they aren't touching each other and you can see through them. And then once I get it in a reasonable condition, then I will move to looking at it from the angle and working on putting it in flat. Again, in putting it in flat, I am not trying to do everything completely at once. I'm going to do it reasonably well in comparison to its original condition. And in the course of straightening this hairspring, I'm going to go back and forth between putting it in flat and putting it in round, and then putting it in flat and putting it in round, and each time refining it just a little bit more, and each time in using the same techniques, the 90-degree rule, the 180-degree rule, and refining it. And as you'll see in the course of this sped up video, that I go back and forth several different times. As I draw closer to completing this hairspring, and as the video comes to an end, I would like to thank you for watching. I hope the information here has been helpful to you. Feel free to leave a comment below. And again, thank you for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.